My name is Rachel. I'm 34 years old. 8 months ago, I woke up from a medically induced coma after a car accident nearly killed me. I couldn't move my left arm. I couldn't speak above a whisper. And the first thing I saw when I opened my eyes wasn't my husband holding my hand or crying tears of relief. It was divorce papers sitting on the table beside my hospital bed with a yellow sticky note that read, "Sign when you're able. I've moved out." What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly known in that moment, was that a night shift nurse named Denise had been recording everything that happened in my room while I was unconscious. And what she captured on her phone would eventually destroy my husband's entire case, expose his affair, and reveal a conspiracy between him and my own mother that had been years in the making. I'm going to tell you everything, every detail, every conversation, every moment that led to me lying in that hospital bed, abandoned by the man I'd given 11 years of my life to, only to discover that the people I trusted most had been planning my disposal like I was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. But I need you to understand something first. I wasn't always this person, the one who could sit here and tell this story with clarity. For most of my marriage, I was the woman who apologized for breathing too loudly. I was the wife who believed every criticism was just my husband trying to help me be better. I was the daughter who thought that if I just tried harder, loved more, gave more, maybe one day I'd finally be enough. I was wrong about all of it. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story resonates with you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I have a feeling some of you are going to recognize parts of this story because you've lived something similar. Let me take you back to where it all began. I met David Chen when I was 22 years old. It was September of 2013, and I was working as an administrative assistant at a real estate development company in Portland, Oregon. He walked into our office wearing a charcoal gray suit that was slightly too big in the shoulders, carrying a briefcase that looked brand new, and I remember thinking he seemed nervous. Endearingly nervous. Like a kid on his first day at a new school. He was there to interview for a project manager position, and I was the one who greeted him at reception. I offered him coffee while he waited. He said yes, then immediately changed it to water, then back to coffee, and finally admitted he was so anxious he probably shouldn't have any caffeine at all. I laughed, he laughed, and something shifted. He got the job. 3 weeks later, he asked me to dinner. 4 months after that, we were officially dating. By the time I turned 24, we were engaged. My mother, Patricia, was thrilled. Not because she particularly liked David, I realize now, but because my getting married meant she could stop worrying about her single daughter reflecting poorly on her. My mother was the kind of woman who measured a daughter's worth by her relationship status and the size of her engagement ring. The ring David gave me was modest, a 1/4-carat diamond on a thin gold band. He apologized for it constantly, promised he'd upgrade it once we were more financially stable. I told him I loved it exactly as it was, and I meant it. What I didn't know then was that my mother had called David the night before he proposed and told him exactly what she expected. She told him I was difficult and too independent, and that he'd need to manage me carefully. She told him that I had a habit of putting my career ahead of family and that he should discourage any ambitions I had that didn't involve supporting him. I found this out 11 years later from Denise's recordings, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Our wedding was June 14th, 2016. Small ceremony at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley. 62 guests. My dress was off the rack from a department store, which my mother reminded me of approximately 47 times throughout the planning process. David's family flew in from San Francisco. His mother, Helen, was warm and genuine. His father, Michael, was quiet but kind. His younger sister, Lily, became one of my closest friends almost immediately. The first 2 years of marriage were good. Not perfect, but good. David was attentive and affectionate. We rented a small apartment in the Pearl District. I got promoted to office manager. He landed bigger projects. We talked about buying a house, having kids, building a life. The first time I noticed something was wrong was November of 2018. David had been working late for weeks, something about a major commercial development project. I decided to surprise him with dinner at the office. I made his favorite, chicken parmesan with homemade marinara. I packed it in insulated containers and drove downtown. When I got there, the office was dark. The security guard told me everyone had left hours ago. I called David. He didn't answer. I texted him. No response. When he finally came home at 11:30 that night, he smelled like perfume. Not mine. Something floral and expensive. When I asked where he'd been, he looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Cold, annoyed, like I was a child asking a stupid question. "I was at a client dinner," he said. "You know how these things go." I didn't, actually. I'd never been invited to a client dinner, but I nodded. I apologized for showing up unannounced. I told myself the perfume must have been from a handshake or a hug with a female client. These things happen. I put the chicken parmesan in the refrigerator and went to bed alone. That was the first time I minimized something I should have questioned. It wouldn't be the last. By 2019, David had become someone I barely recognized. The nervous, endearing man I'd met at reception had been replaced by someone who criticized everything I did. The way I loaded the dishwasher was wrong. The way I folded his shirts was wrong. The way I breathed when I slept was too loud and kept him awake. I started sleeping in the guest room 3 nights a week just to give him peace. One night in March of that year, I made salmon for dinner. It was a recipe I'd been perfecting for months, something I was genuinely proud of. David took one bite, set down his fork, and said, "This is why I don't trust you to make important decisions, Rachel. You can't even cook a simple piece of fish without ruining it." I stared at my plate. The salmon looked perfect. It tasted perfect. But his words made me doubt my own senses. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'll do better next time." He pushed back from the table and left the room. I heard him on the phone in his office, laughing with someone, his voice light and warm in a way it never was with me anymore. I ate my salmon alone and told myself this was just a rough patch. Every marriage had rough patches. My friend Sandra was the first person to say something. We'd known each other since college, and she came to visit for a weekend in July of 2019. She watched David talk to me, watched the way I flinched when he entered a room, watched me apologize for things that didn't require apologies. On Sunday morning, while David was at the gym, Sandra sat me down in the kitchen and said, "Rachel, I need to ask you something. And I need you to really think before you answer." I waited. "Are you happy?" Such a simple question, 3 words, and I couldn't answer it. "I'm fine," I said eventually. "Marriage is work. Everyone says that." Sandra shook her head. "Work, yes, but not like this. Not where you're the only one doing the work while he tears you down. Rach, he criticized you 8 times yesterday. I counted, 8 times in one day, and every single time you apologized to him." I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend David, but the number sat in my stomach like a stone. 8 times, and I hadn't even noticed. "It's not that bad," I said finally. "He's under a lot of stress at work." Sandra looked at me with something I couldn't identify then. I know now it was grief. Grief for the friend she was watching disappear. "Just promise me you'll think about what I said," she whispered. I promised. And then I buried the conversation so deep I almost forgot it happened. The financial control started so gradually, I didn't realize it was happening until I was completely trapped. It began in early 2020, right before the pandemic. David suggested we consolidate our finances for efficiency. He would manage everything, pay all the bills, handle our investments. All I needed to do was direct deposit my paycheck into our joint account. "It makes sense," he said. "I have the background in finance. You're so busy with work. Let me take this burden off your shoulders." It felt like a gift, like he was taking care of me. Within 6 months, my name was off our credit cards. My name was off our savings account. The only account I had access to was the joint checking, and David monitored every transaction. If I bought a coffee on the way to work, he'd ask why I was wasting money. If I bought a new shirt, he'd want to see the receipt. If I went grocery shopping and spent more than his predetermined budget, he'd sigh heavily and say, "We need to talk about your spending problem, Rachel." I didn't have a spending problem. I was making $68,000 a year and spending maybe $200 a month on anything that wasn't bills or groceries. But I believed him. I believed I was the problem. In September of 2020, my grandmother on my mother's side passed away, Grandma Rose. She was 94, sharp as a tack until the very end, and she was the only person in my family who ever made me feel unconditionally loved. She left me an inheritance, not life-changing money, but significant, $87,000. David convinced me to put it in our investment account, the one I didn't have access to. He said he'd grow it for our future, for the house we'd eventually buy, for the children we'd eventually have. I signed the papers without reading them carefully. I trusted him. That money disappeared. I don't mean he spent it on bills or invested it poorly. I mean, I later discovered, through forensic accounting during the divorce, that he transferred it to a private account I knew nothing about. An account he'd been feeding for years with chunks of my salary. But that discovery came later. Much later. Okay, I need to pause here for a second. I'm curious. Have you ever trusted someone with your finances only to find out later they were hiding things from you? Type your answer in the comments. And if this story is hitting close to home, please hit that like button so more people can find it. The year 2021 brought something I thought might save my marriage. I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. We'd stopped trying the year before after David said he wasn't sure he wanted children anymore. But there I was, staring at 2 pink lines on a Tuesday morning in February, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped the test in the toilet. I was terrified to tell David, terrified of his reaction. But a small, desperate part of me hoped this would change everything. Maybe a baby would bring back the man I married. Maybe a baby would make him love me again. I made a nice dinner. I set the table with candles. I bought a little box and put the positive test inside with a note that said, "Coming September 2021. David came home late, as usual. He barely looked at the dinner. When he opened the box, his face went completely blank. "You're pregnant?" he said. Not a question. "Yes." I could barely breathe. I know we weren't trying, but I thought maybe, how did this happen? I actually laughed, a nervous, confused sound. The usual way, I assume. He didn't laugh. He set down the box and rubbed his temples like I'd given him a migraine instead of news about our child. "We need to think about this carefully," he said. "A baby right now, with everything going on at work, I don't know if this is the right time." I felt something cold spread through my chest. "What are you saying?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something calculating in his eyes. "I'm saying we need to consider all our options." I didn't consider any options. For the first time in years, I made a decision without his approval. I was having this baby. David never explicitly told me to terminate the pregnancy. He just made it clear through silences and sighs and sudden work trips that he wasn't happy about it. He didn't come to my first ultrasound, or my second. When I texted him a picture of our baby at 16 weeks, he responded with a thumbs up emoji. I cried in the parking lot of the OB's office for 45 minutes. At 22 weeks, I started bleeding. I was alone. David was on yet another business trip, Seattle this time. I called an ambulance, was rushed to the hospital, and spent 3 days fighting to keep my baby alive. She didn't make it. I lost her on a Thursday afternoon in a cold hospital room with no one holding my hand. David didn't come home until Saturday. He said the airports were delayed, that he'd tried everything, that he was sorry. But when I looked at his credit card statement later, searching for something, anything, I found dinner charges at a restaurant in Seattle on Thursday night, charges for 2 people. He was having dinner while I was delivering our dead daughter. I named her Grace. He never asked. The months after losing Grace were a blur of grief and medication and my mother telling me to move on because these things happen. David became even more distant. He started sleeping in the guest room permanently. He stopped touching me entirely. And still, I stayed. I stayed because I didn't know who I was without him anymore. I stayed because my mother told me divorce would be humiliating for the whole family. I stayed because I'd given this man 11 years of my life, and leaving felt like admitting I'd wasted all of it. I stayed because I was broken. In 2022, I finally started therapy. I told David I was going to yoga classes on Tuesday evenings. It was the only way he'd let me leave the house without questioning where I was going. My therapist's name was Dr. Michelle Okonkwo. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a directness that startled me at first. She didn't let me minimize. She didn't let me make excuses. She named things I'd been afraid to name. What you're describing, she said during our 4th session, is financial abuse. It's emotional abuse. It's isolation. I flinched at the word, abuse. That word was for other people. People whose husbands hit them, people whose stories were worse than mine. It's not that bad, I said automatically. Doctor? Okonkwo leaned forward. Rachel, you just told me your husband has complete control of your finances, criticizes you daily, isolated you from your friends, and wasn't present when you lost your baby. You have no access to your own money. You have to lie about going to therapy. What would need to happen for you to consider it that bad? I couldn't answer. She gave me homework. Start keeping a journal, document everything, save money if you can. Begin building an exit plan, just in case. I started hiding cash, $20 here, $40 there, from grocery money and the rare occasions I had access to the ATM. I kept it in a tampon box under the bathroom sink. David would never look there. By January of 2023, I had almost $3,000. It felt like a fortune. It felt like freedom. I also started keeping a detailed journal. Every criticism David made with dates and times. Every evening he came home smelling like perfume. Every unexplained charge on the credit card statement, every lie I caught him in. I didn't know yet what I would do with this information, but having it made me feel less crazy, less alone. In March of 2023, I discovered the affair. I wasn't snooping. David had left his iPad on the kitchen counter, and a notification popped up from someone named Megan H. The message preview read, "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again on Thursday. Love you. Love you." My hands went numb. I picked up the iPad. His passcode was the same as always, our wedding anniversary. June 14th, 2016. A date that now felt like a cruel joke. I found everything, hundreds of messages going back 2 years, photos I can't describe without feeling sick. plans for their future together, and something that made me drop the iPad on the tile floor with a crash that echoed through the empty house. Megan wasn't just any woman. She was David's project manager at work, the one he'd hired personally in 2021. The one he'd mentioned casually at dinner parties as incredibly talented and going places. She was 26 years old, the same age I was when David and I got married. I should have confronted him. I should have screamed, thrown things, demanded answers. That's what people do in movies. Instead, I carefully placed the iPad exactly where I'd found it. I went to the bathroom and threw up. Then I called my sister-in-law, Lily, the one person in David's family who had become genuinely my friend. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to not tell anyone. Not yet." Lily listened. She cried. She said she'd suspected something for a while, but hadn't wanted to believe it. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know. I need to think. I need a plan." That night, I acted like nothing had happened. David came home at 8:30, kissed me absently on the cheek, and complained about traffic. I made dinner. We watched TV. He fell asleep on the couch. I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, planning my escape. But here's the thing about plans. Life doesn't care about them. On April 15th, 2023, I was driving home from Dr. Okonkwo's office. It was a Tuesday evening, around 7:30. The roads were wet from an afternoon rain. I was stopped at a red light on Morrison Street, about 3 miles from home. I remember the radio was playing that song Anti-Hero by Taylor Swift. I remember thinking about how ironic the lyrics were. I remember the light turning green, and then nothing. A 23-year-old college student named Tyler Matthews ran the red light at 47 miles per hour. He'd been texting his girlfriend. His Honda Civic hit the driver's side of my car so hard it spun me across the intersection and into a light pole. I learned later that it took first responders 40 minutes to extract me from the wreckage. I had a traumatic brain injury, a shattered left arm, 4 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and internal bleeding so severe they nearly lost me twice on the operating table. I was in a coma for 17 days. When I woke up, I couldn't remember the accident at all. The last thing I remembered was the Taylor Swift song, then blackness, then slowly, light and beeping machines and a nurse named Denise standing over me with tears in her eyes. "You're back," she whispered. "Oh, thank God, you're back." I tried to speak, but my throat was on fire. I tried to move, but my body felt like it belonged to someone else. "Don't try to talk," Denise said. "You've been intubated. They removed the tube yesterday. Just rest." I looked around the room, searching for David, for my mother, for anyone familiar. The room was empty except for Denise. That's when I saw the papers on the bedside table. A yellow folder with a sticky note on top. I couldn't read the note from my angle, but something about it made my stomach clench. I spent 3 more days in a fog of medication and pain before I was coherent enough to understand what had happened. Denise explained gently, holding my hand, that I'd been in a serious accident, that I was lucky to be alive, that I would need months of physical therapy for my arm and ongoing monitoring for my brain injury. "Your husband," she said carefully, "has been here. He came most days in the first week." Most days in the first week. Not every day. Not constantly, desperately, refusing to leave my side. "He had to go back to work," Denise continued. Her voice was strange, cautious. "But he left some things for you." She looked at the yellow folder. It took all my strength to reach for it, to pull it toward me, to read the sticky note that said, in David's neat handwriting, "Sign when you're able. I've moved out." Divorce papers. My husband had filed for divorce while I was in a coma, unable to breathe on my own, machines keeping my heart beating and my lungs functioning. He wanted half of everything, including the house we'd bought with my inheritance money. He wanted to be released from any responsibility for my medical bills. He wanted me to sign an agreement that I would not seek alimony. The papers were dated April 29th, 2023, 14 days after the accident, 3 days before I woke up. I looked at Denise. I couldn't speak yet. Not really, but she understood my question. "I know," she said softly. "I know what he did. And I need to tell you something, Rachel. I need to show you something. But you have to be strong, okay? You have to be really strong." She pulled out her phone. Denise Martinez was 53 years old and had been a critical care nurse for 27 years. She'd seen everything. Patients who recovered against all odds. Patients who slipped away despite every intervention. Families who pulled together in crisis. And families who fell apart. She told me later that in all her years of nursing, she'd never seen anything quite like what happened in my hospital room. "I started recording on day 4, she said. "I know it's not strictly protocol, but something felt wrong. The way your husband acted when he visited, it wasn't like any worried spouse I'd ever seen. He didn't hold your hand. He didn't talk to you. He just sat in the corner on his phone, texting someone and smiling while his wife was dying." She swallowed hard. "And then your mother came." My mother, Patricia. I hadn't even thought about where she was during all this. "They talked about you like you weren't even there," Denise continued. "Like you were already gone. And the things they said, Rachel, I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. So I started recording, hidden in my scrub pocket, and I kept recording every time they came." She handed me her phone. I pressed play on the first video. The recording was shaky, slightly muffled, but the voices were clear. I saw my hospital room from an angle near the door. There was me, unconscious in the bed, tubes everywhere, machines beeping steadily. And there, in the visitor chairs, sat David and my mother. "She's going to be a vegetable," my mother said. She was examining her nails, not even looking at me. "The doctor said there's no way to know how much brain damage there is. She might never be the same." "Which is exactly why we need to move quickly," David replied. He was scrolling through his phone. "I've already talked to my lawyer. We can file for divorce on grounds of incapacitation if she doesn't wake up within 30 days. "And the house?" "In my name. I made sure of that when we bought it." A pause. "What about her inheritance?" my mother asked. "The money from my mother?" "Gone. Invested. She has no proof it was ever hers." My mother laughed. A light, casual laugh. Like they were discussing brunch plans instead of my life. "She was always too trusting," Patricia said. "I told you that from the beginning. All you had to do was make her feel loved, and she'd give you everything. Just like her father." David looked up from his phone. "You're sure the life insurance is still active?" $350,000. I'm listed as secondary beneficiary if you die, or if you're no longer married to her. If she dies while you're still legally married, you get everything. If she dies after the divorce, I split it with you per our agreement." They had an agreement. My husband and my mother had an agreement about my life insurance money. I felt something fundamental break inside me. Not my heart. I think my heart had already been broken so many times there was nothing left to shatter. No, this was something else. Something deeper. Maybe my faith in humanity. Maybe my ability to be surprised by cruelty. Or maybe it was the last thread of connection I felt to either of them. I kept watching. Over the next several days' worth of recordings, I learned everything. David and my mother had been communicating for years. Not in any inappropriate way, at least not at first. But Patricia had seen David as her project, her way of controlling me even from a distance. She'd coached him on how to handle me, how to criticize without being too obvious, how to isolate me from friends who might encourage my independence, how to make me financially dependent. She needs to feel safe, but not too safe, my mother said in one recording. Keep her slightly off balance. That way she'll always work harder to please you. And David apparently had been an eager student, but it got worse. In a recording from day 7, Megan appeared. She walked into my hospital room like she owned it. Blonde, tall, wearing a dress that was entirely inappropriate for a hospital visit. She kissed David in front of my unconscious body, touched his face, whispered something in his ear that made him laugh. "Is she going to die?" Megan asked, looking at me with mild curiosity. "Maybe, probably. The doctors aren't optimistic." "Good." She said it so casually. Good. Like my death was a minor convenience, a problem solved. "What about her family?" Megan continued. "Patricia's on board. She never liked Rachel anyway. Too much like her father. The sister-in-law might be a problem, but she's powerless." "And the money?" David pulled out his phone and showed her something. "Between the life insurance, the inheritance I moved, and the house, we're looking at about $800,000 once everything's settled. Enough for that condo in San Diego you wanted. Enough to start fresh." Megan smiled. "You promise?" "I promise. A few more weeks, and this is all over." They left together. Didn't even glance back at me. I watched 14 recordings in total. Each one revealed another layer of betrayal. Another piece of the conspiracy I'd been too naive, too trusting, too desperately hoping to see. My mother had been feeding David information for years. Every insecurity I'd shared with her, every fear, every hope. She'd weaponized my own confessions against me. David had been stealing from me since before we were married. The forensic accountant would later uncover almost $400,000 moved, hidden, spent on his affair and investments I knew nothing about. And Megan wasn't just his girlfriend. She was pregnant. 3 months along, with a baby they'd planned together while I was trying to heal from losing Grace. All of this happened while I was unconscious, fighting for my life, tubes in my throat and machines breathing for me. They'd already divided up my corpse. They were just waiting for me to die. But I didn't die. And now I was awake. And I had proof of everything. Denise connected me with a lawyer named Patricia Okonkwo. No relation to my therapist, just a coincidence of names that felt somehow significant. Patricia specialized in divorce cases involving financial abuse, and she was exactly as fierce as I needed her to be. "This is one of the most egregious cases I've ever seen," she said during our first meeting, which happened in my hospital room because I still couldn't walk. "The recordings are admissible. Oregon is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, and Denise was present during all of them." She paused. "But I want to be clear, Rachel. This isn't just a divorce case anymore. What they did, what they planned, could potentially be prosecuted as conspiracy to commit insurance fraud at minimum. Your mother discussing your life insurance beneficiaries while assuming you die? Your husband researching divorce procedures for an incapacitated spouse? If we can prove they were hoping you'd die faster so they could collect..." She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need her to. My recovery was slow and painful. The brain injury had affected my short-term memory and my ability to concentrate. My arm required 3 surgeries. I spent 2 months in the hospital, then another month in a rehabilitation facility. During that time, I told no one except Denise and Patricia about the recordings. Not Lily. Not Dr. Okonkwo, though I resumed therapy sessions via video call as soon as I was able. Not my father, who had been divorced from my mother for 15 years and barely spoke to me because Patricia had poisoned that relationship too. I let David think I was weak. I let him think I was confused. When he finally visited me in the rehabilitation facility, a single visit in 3 months, I played the part he expected. "I don't understand what's happening," I said, my voice still raspy from the intubation damage. "The divorce papers." "It's what's best," he said smoothly. "For both of us. You need to focus on recovery. You don't need the stress of maintaining a marriage on top of everything else." "But where will I go? The house?" "Your mother said you can stay with her, just temporarily, until you get back on your feet." My mother, the same woman who'd laughed while discussing my life insurance. "I don't have any money," I whispered. "We'll figure something out." He patted my hand like I was a dog. "Just sign the papers, Rachel. Make this easy." I looked at him, this man I'd loved for 11 years. This man who had held me on our wedding day and promised forever. This man who had watched me lose our daughter and then had dinner with his mistress the same night. "I need more time," I said. "I can't think clearly yet. The doctors say it's the brain injury." He sighed impatiently, but nodded. "Fine. A few more weeks, but don't drag this out, Rachel. It won't end well for you." A threat from my hospital bed about my own divorce. "I understand," I said quietly. He left without saying goodbye. "All right, I want to check in with you again. At this point in the story, if you were me, would you have confronted him right there?" Type yes or no in the comments. I want to know what you would have done. And if you're dying to see what happens next, make sure you're subscribed, because what happened next changed everything. I was released from rehabilitation on August 3rd, 2023. I did not go to my mother's house. I went to an extended stay hotel suite that Patricia had arranged, paid for with a credit card in her firm's name so David couldn't track me. The first thing I did was contact my father. Richard Bennett was 62 years old and lived in Seattle, where he'd moved after the divorce when I was 19. My mother had spent years telling me he didn't want contact, that he was disappointed in me, that he'd never really loved either of us. When I called him, he started crying. "Rachel, oh my God, Rachel, I've been trying to reach you for months. Your mother told me you didn't want to see me. She said you blame me for the divorce." "I didn't blame you," I said. "I didn't know you were trying to contact me." We talked for 4 hours that day. He told me about all the birthday cards returned unopened, the graduation gift that came back refused, the emails Patricia had sent from my account saying I needed space. My mother had been sabotaging my relationship with my father since the divorce. 15 years of manufactured estrangement. "I'm so sorry," Dad kept saying. "I should have tried harder. I should have shown up anyway." "It's not your fault. She's very good at what she does." "What's she done now?" I told him everything. The recordings, the affair, the life insurance, the conspiracy. When I finished, my father was silent for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" he finally asked. "I need a place to stay, just temporarily, and I need help with the legal bills." "Done. I'm driving down this weekend. You're coming home with me." For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. Patricia the lawyer, not my mother Patricia, built my case meticulously over the next 3 months. She subpoenaed financial records, uncovered hidden accounts, documented every dollar David had stolen. The forensic accountant calculated the total at $387,000, including my grandmother's inheritance, skimmed money from my salary, and assets he'd hidden in accounts under his mother's maiden name. She also prepared for the confrontation, because I wasn't just going to sign David's papers and disappear. I was going to face him, and my mother, and Megan if she dared to show up. The location was strategic. David had insisted on a family meeting to discuss the divorce amicably. He wanted it at my mother's house, where they'd have home field advantage. Patricia suggested we accept. "Let them think they're in control," she said. "Let them think you're still the same Rachel they manipulated for years, and then we show them exactly who they're dealing with." The meeting was scheduled for November 18th, 2023, 7 months after the accident. My mother had invited extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins. She framed it as a pre-Thanksgiving gathering, a chance for everyone to reconnect after my health scare. What she didn't know was that I had invited some guests of my own. My father, Lily, Dr. Okonkwo, who agreed to come as personal support, and Patricia's legal partner, Marcus Washington, who would be handling any immediate legal matters that arose. I also had a USB drive containing every single recording Denise had made. The day arrived cold and gray, typical November weather for Oregon. My father drove me to my mother's house, a 2-story colonial in Lake Oswego that she'd bought with money from the divorce settlement and then expanded with money I now suspected came from other sources. I hadn't been here in almost 3 years. Everything looked exactly the same. The manicured lawn, the ceramic frogs by the door, the welcome mat that said "Blessed" in curling script. I felt sick. "You don't have to do this," my father said. "We can turn around right now." "No, I need to do this. I need them to know that I know. I need to watch them try to explain." He squeezed my hand. "I'll be right beside you." We walked to the door. I didn't knock. I just walked in. The house was full of people. I saw cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, aunts and uncles who'd always seemed uncomfortable around me. And there, in the center of the living room, holding court like she always did, was my mother. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater and tasteful gold jewelry. Her hair was freshly done. She looked like a woman hosting a lovely family gathering, not a woman who'd plotted to profit from her daughter's death. "Rachel." She came toward me with her arms open, her face arranged in an expression of relief and joy. "Oh, sweetheart, you're here. I was so worried you wouldn't come." She tried to hug me. I stepped back. "Hello, Mother?" She faltered at my tone but recovered quickly. Come in, everyone's here. David's in the kitchen. He'll be so happy to see you." I doubt that. Something flickered in her eyes. Concern, suspicion, but she just smiled wider. "Now, don't be silly. We're all family here. We're going to work through this together." I looked around the room. All these relatives who had been fed years of Patricia's narrative about me. The difficult daughter, the ungrateful child, the one who never appreciated everything her mother did for her. David walked in from the kitchen. He was wearing a button-down shirt I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago. He looked relaxed, confident. He thought this was going to be easy. "Rachel." He nodded at me like we were business acquaintances. "Glad you could make it." "Where's Megan?" I asked calmly. The room went silent. "What?" David's face didn't change, but his eyes did. "Megan, your girlfriend, the one who's pregnant with your baby, the one you've been sleeping with for 2 years, the one you brought to my hospital room while I was in a coma." Now his face changed. Now everyone's face changed. "I don't know what you're talking about." His voice was steady, but I could see the panic starting. "Really? Because I have videos that suggest otherwise." I held up the USB drive. "What is that?" my mother demanded. Her mask was slipping. I could see the real Patricia underneath, the cold, calculating woman who'd raised me to be a pawn. "This," I said, "is approximately 14 hours of video recordings made by a nurse named Denise Martinez. She recorded every conversation that happened in my hospital room while I was unconscious. Every single one." I looked at my mother. "Including the ones where you and David discussed how to split my life insurance money after I died." The room erupted. My Aunt Clara started asking what I meant about life insurance. My Uncle Robert demanded to know what was going on. Cousins were pulling out phones, probably to text others who weren't there. David tried to take control. Rachel is clearly confused, he said loudly. This is a symptom of her brain injury. The doctors warned us she might have memory issues, paranoid delusions. Oh, I have memory issues, I agreed, which is why I had to watch the videos several times to process what I was seeing. Would you like to know what's on them? This is ridiculous. Let's start with April 22nd, day 7 of my coma. Megan came to visit. She kissed you. She asked if I was going to die. You said probably. She said good. And then you showed her something on your phone and told her you were looking at about $800,000 once everything was settled. Enough for a condo in San Diego. David's face had gone gray. That doesn't prove anything. April 24th, my mother and you alone in my room. She said, and I quote, all you had to do was make her feel loved and she'd give you everything. Just like her father. You discussed the life insurance policy. $350,000. She mentioned your agreement. I turned to look at my mother directly. What agreement was that, Mom? The one where you coached David on how to manipulate me for 11 years? The one where you'd split my life insurance if I died after the divorce? The one where you've been feeding him my secrets since we were engaged? My mother's face had transformed. Gone was the gracious hostess. In her place was someone I'd only glimpsed before, someone hard and furious and caught. You ungrateful little... I'm not finished. My voice was calm, almost eerily calm. I'd practiced this in therapy for weeks. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry. I was going to lay out the facts like a court document. On April 27th, David, you called your lawyer from my hospital room. I could hear the conversation. You discussed filing for divorce on grounds of incapacitation. You specifically asked how quickly you could sell assets if I remained in the coma longer than 30 days. Marcus Washington stepped forward. I have documentation of the hidden accounts. $387,000, Mr. Chen. Funds that legally belong to Mrs. Chen, including her inheritance from her grandmother's estate. David looked at Marcus, then at Patricia, then back at me. This is entrapment. Those recordings were made without consent. Oregon is a one-party consent state, Patricia said coolly. Denise Martinez was present for every recording. It's all perfectly legal. Besides, I added, the financial crimes stand on their own. The recordings just provide context for your character, and possibly for additional charges, depending on how the DA interprets your discussions about my life insurance while hoping I'd die. My mother tried a different approach. Rachel, sweetheart, you're misunderstanding. We were just discussing contingencies. That's what families do when someone is in the hospital. We were worried sick about you. You never once said you hoped I'd recover. I cut her off. In 14 hours of recordings, neither of you ever expressed hope that I'd survive. Not once. You discussed my assets, my debts, my life insurance, my house, but never once did either of you say you wanted me to live. The room was completely silent. You know what you did say, Mom? You said I was always too trusting. You laughed about how easy I was to manipulate. You told David all my secrets, all my vulnerabilities, specifically so he could use them against me. You've been sabotaging my relationship with my father for 15 years, and you coached my husband on how to abuse me. My father stepped forward. I'm here now. I know everything, and I'm taking Rachel back to Seattle with me today. Aunt Clara finally spoke. Patricia, is this true? Did you really discuss your daughter's life insurance while she was dying? She wasn't dying, my mother snapped. She was in a coma. There's a difference. Is there? I asked. Because the doctors told David I might not wake up, and instead of praying for my recovery, he was filing divorce papers. Lily appeared beside me. I hadn't seen her come in, but suddenly she was there, her hand on my arm. I knew something was wrong, she said to the room. My brother stopped being himself years ago. He used to be kind. He used to be good. And then he met her. She looked at my mother with disgust. You poisoned him. You turned him into whatever this is. David finally lost his composure. Enough, he shouted. This is insane. Rachel is mentally unstable. She had a brain injury. She's not thinking clearly. These recordings are probably doctored, and even if they're not, I never did anything illegal. Financial fraud is illegal, Marcus said calmly. Hiding marital assets is illegal. And while hoping your spouse would die isn't technically a crime, it certainly doesn't look good in front of a family court judge. What do you want? David's voice cracked. What do you want from me? I looked at him for a long moment. This man I'd loved. This man who'd destroyed me. I want the divorce, I said, on my terms. I want every dollar you stole returned. I want the house sold and my share deposited into an account only I control. I want you to admit, in writing, what you did. And I want you to stay away from me for the rest of your life. And if I refuse? Patricia smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Then we go to court. The recordings become public record. The financial fraud gets referred to the DA. Megan's pregnancy gets entered into the timeline, proving your affair was premeditated. And your reputation, your career, your relationship with your family, all of it goes up in flames. David looked around the room. No one would meet his eyes. Even my mother had stepped back, already trying to distance herself from him. Fine, he whispered. Whatever you want. Just make this stop. I turned to my mother. And you. I never want to see you again. I'm blocking your number. I'm removing you as an emergency contact. I'm taking myself off your life insurance, and I'm making sure you never have legal access to any part of my life again. Rachel, don't be dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm protecting myself. Something I should have done years ago. I walked toward her until we were face to face. You were supposed to protect me. You were supposed to love me. But you sold me out to a man who stole from me, cheated on me, and hoped I'd die so he could collect on my insurance. And you helped him every step of the way. My mother's face twisted. You were always too sensitive, she hissed. Just like your father. That's why I had to manage you. Left to yourself, you'd have ruined everything. I'm done being managed. I stepped back. Goodbye, Mother. I turned to my father. I'm ready to go. We walked out of that house together. Lily followed. Doctor. Okonkwo met us at the car with a gentle hug. Behind us, I could hear voices rising as the rest of the family demanded explanations. I didn't look back. The divorce was finalized on February 14th, 2024, Valentine's Day. I chose the date on purpose. A final piece of poetry in a marriage that had been nothing but prose. David surrendered everything. The house sold for $420,000. My share, after legal fees and the repayment of stolen funds, was $290,000. Combined with what the forensic accountant recovered from his hidden accounts, I walked away with just over $450,000. More than that, I walked away free. Megan left David 3 weeks after the confrontation. Apparently, she'd been counting on that San Diego condo and that fresh start. When it became clear David was going to lose everything, she decided the risk wasn't worth it. She had the baby, a boy, in June. David has partial custody. I try not to think about it. My mother attempted contact exactly once, a letter sent to my father's address in Seattle. It was 3 pages of justification and blame. She never apologized. She never acknowledged what she'd done. She just explained in great detail why I should understand her perspective. I didn't read past the first paragraph. My father burned it in his fireplace, and we never spoke of it again. The extended family split. About half of them cut off my mother entirely. The other half made excuses for her. I stopped keeping track. The only relatives I maintain contact with now are Lily, who has become more of a sister to me than my own brother ever was, and a few cousins who reached out privately to apologize for not seeing the truth sooner. David's career survived, barely. He left the Portland company and took a job in Phoenix. Last I heard, he was engaged again, to a woman 11 years younger than him. I hope for her sake that he's changed, but I doubt it. As for me, I'm writing this from my apartment in Seattle, exactly 8 months after I woke up from that coma. It's a small place. 1 bedroom, a view of Puget Sound that I never get tired of. I've decorated it entirely with things I chose myself, not things David approved of or my mother thought were appropriate. I have a new therapist here, a woman named Dr. Sandra Kim. I see her every week. We're working through the trauma, the betrayal, the grief of losing the family I thought I had. Some days are harder than others. Some nights I still wake up with panic attacks, convinced I'm back in that hospital bed and everyone who was supposed to love me is planning how to profit from my death. But I'm also healing. I've started a support group for survivors of financial abuse. We meet every Thursday at a coffee shop downtown. There are 8 of us now, all women, all with stories that made me realize how common this kind of betrayal is. My father and I are rebuilding our relationship. It's awkward sometimes. We lost 15 years to my mother's manipulation, but he's trying. Every Sunday, we have dinner together. He's teaching me to cook the recipes his mother used to make. We don't talk about Patricia unless I bring her up first. And Denise, the nurse who saved me, she's become one of my closest friends. She left the hospital last month to start her own patient advocacy service. I was her first donor. I'm not going to say I'm grateful for what happened. I'm not one of those people who believes everything happens for a reason. There's no reason good enough for what David and my mother did. But I am grateful to be alive. I'm grateful that I woke up. I'm grateful that a woman I'd never met chose to do the right thing when she saw something wrong. And I'm grateful that I finally know the truth about who I was surrounded by for so many years. I spent 34 years trying to be enough for people who were never going to love me. I apologized for existing. I made myself small so others could feel big. I gave and gave and gave until there was nothing left, and then I blamed myself for being empty. I don't do that anymore. If you've been through something like this, if you've been manipulated by someone who was supposed to love you, if you've been stolen from, lied to, made to feel crazy for seeing what was right in front of you, I want you to hear something. It wasn't your fault. Their cruelty says nothing about your worth. Their manipulation says nothing about your intelligence. The fact that you trusted them says everything about your capacity for love and nothing about your gullibility. You are not stupid. You are not weak. You are not too sensitive. You were betrayed by people who were supposed to protect you. That's on them, not on you. And if you're still in that situation, if you're reading this and recognizing your own story, I want you to know that there is a way out. It might not be easy. It might be the hardest thing you've ever done. But you can leave. You can rebuild. You can find people who love you for real, not for what you can give them. I'm living proof of that. Last week, I went to the beach with my father and Lily. It was cold and windy, and the water was gray, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. We walked along the shore and didn't talk about David or Patricia or any of the ugliness. We just walked. At one point, my father stopped and looked out at the water. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "I know I wasn't there for most of your life, but I'm so proud of who you've become." I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching the waves, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not happiness,